Warm greetings to everyone. I, Vedanti Sunil Bharadwaj, Head of External Communications, Involvement, take the privilege to welcome you on behalf of Involvement to today's session about effective CV writing. Participants are requested to abide by the following rules for the session. First, please be respectful towards other attendees. Second, please do not take any photos or videos during the session. Third, please keep your microphones on mute and cameras off at all times unless the speaker encourages you to interact. Please keep in mind that violation to the rules would lead to immediate removal from the meeting. I would request all the participants to actively participate in the session. Friends, let me also inform you that we will have a question and answer round at the end of the session. To ask your questions, you can either unmute or type the questions in the chat box. Let me introduce to you our guest speaker of the day, Dr. Bhakti Vyas. Dr. Bhakti Vyas holds a PhD in stem cell and molecular biology from the InSTEM NCBS Bangalore. She has completed her MTech in biotechnology from Dr. D.Y. Patil College, Pune. She is currently working as a scientist at a gene therapy company, 12 Bio, located at Copenhagen, Denmark. Her current research aims at technological advancement of CRISPR-based gene editing tools for improved therapy of genetic disorders. Bhakti ma'am has published her doctoral research in international journals and has been a co-author of an invited review article. She is passionate about career development and has been providing career guidance to both school as well as college students. We are pleased to have you with us, ma'am. Now I would like to invite Dr. Vyas to address the gathering. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Vedanti, for the introduction, and I thank Involvement for giving me this opportunity. I just want to add a couple of things. This is going to be a fun and interactive session, so you can write your questions or comments in the chat box at any time. But I would address those questions only in the question answer sessions. As Vedanti mentioned, it will be great if you can keep your cameras and microphones off to just ensure smooth running of the session. If you're joining this meeting on your mobile phones, I would urge you to sit with your laptops on the side or sit with a pen and paper, because I'm going to give you a few tasks and you would need them, at least a pen and paper for those activities. Okay, so let's get started. How many of you have written a CV before? If yes, just hit the raise hand button in front of you. Okay, quite a few of you. That's impressive. All right, with no further ado, let's get started with the presentation. Can you see my slides? Vedanti, can you see my slides?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Yeah, and also the slide change, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, excellent. All right. So yesterday we heard about how to write good emails from Rachna Govlikar. After that stimulating talk, today we are going to discuss about how to make a good and effective CV. Okay. Now let's start with some very basics. What is a CV? A CV or a biodata is nothing but a brief representation of your education, your work experience, your skills, and it is generally used as a first step of any job application. Now, it can be internships or even full time jobs. Now, once you submit your CV, it goes through intense scrutiny. And if you stand out as a potential candidate, you are called for a job interview. So, purpose of a CV is not just to showcase your skill set and experience. But from an examiner's point of view, the purpose of a CV is to shortlist potential candidates. Okay, I'm going to reiterate this. The purpose of a CV is to aid in shortlisting potential candidates for job interview, which goes to say that from the hundreds and thousands of CV, your CV should stand out as a very relevant and potential candidate. So, you don't have to just make a good looking CV, but also have to make an effective CV. Effective CV is going to get you call for a job interview. Now, what is the roadmap for an effective CV? First of all, make a parent CV. Okay. Now, what is a parent CV? It is nothing but a document which has all the details of your scientific profile. Everything about your education, your experience, your skill sets, all the information. Now, this document does not have to be very neat and tidy. It doesn't need to have a specific template or format. It just needs to be detailed. Okay. Whenever you're going to make a new CV, a main functional CV that you want to send to the examiner, this parent CV would be your template. From here, you would take the required information and put it in the main CV. Okay. Now, once you make this parent CV, next you have to choose a befitting format for that particular job or internship. I'll explain what that means eventually. After that, you have to understand the job requirements to start writing your main functional CV. Okay. Once you understand these requirements, you have to tailor make your CV for every application. This is where generally many people make a blunder. They just use the same biodata for every single internship or job application, which is wrong. You have to make a different version of your CV for every single job application. Remember. Now, these four are the most important points: making your parent CV, choosing the befitting format, understanding job requirements, and tailor making your CV for every application. Next comes a slightly ignored yet very important point, which is your tone of the biodata should be about contributing to the employer or the field, not just about you gaining the experience. Once you do all of this, you have to ensure that your biodata is neat with clear and specific language. Okay. Now, in the interest of time, I've already made a parent CV. So we can straight away go to this, which is choosing the befitting format. So the general questions about format are whether I should write a CV or a resume. Does it have any specific formatting guidelines? And what should be the contents and the sequence of those contents? Now let's address this one by one. A CV and resume, they're very, very loosely used terms. But in the most classical way, a CV is a biodata that is used in jobs involving basic science research, meaning a scientific research where the output is publications in scientific journals. Now, this could be your research institutes, university, even colleges for that matter. And you can use CV in positions like internship or PhD applications, research assistant, junior research fellows, or senior research fellows, and so on. Examiners of CV generally are professors, could be postdoctoral fellows, or sometimes senior PhD students. What do they expect in a CV? They expect it to be detailed with more focus on experience and publication and or presentation of your work in conferences. Now, as opposed to this, a resume is used for non-academic jobs. What I mean by that is jobs that involve science related work but The output of that work is not necessarily publications. It can be industrial products or industrial service, science communication, or even science funding agencies like CSIR and DBT. Now, because this is a very wide range of jobs, the positions can be for internships, for managerial roles, science writing, and so on. Now, resume is evaluated possibly by scientists or sometimes by HR, that is human resource personnel. And what do they expect in resume? As opposed to CV, resume is supposed to be brief, and there's more focus on your technical as well as personality skills, not necessarily your publications. Okay. Now, apart from these very fundamental differences, CV and resume also have some formatting differences. Because CV is supposed to be detailed, it can be up to 4 pages. Resume is supposed to be brief, so it can be 1 or maximum 2 pages. Excuse me. The time spent to review CV can be up to 10 minutes or sometimes up to 5 minutes. But for resume, it is maximally 3 minutes, sometimes even less than that. CV can have bullet points or the numeric bullets, it's optional. But in case of resume, it is preferred. But personally speaking, I like using bullet points or numeric bullets in my biodata. It just makes it much clean and neat. Now, these are the differences, but any biodata would follow certain similar layouts. First of all, you have to use a professional font and not a very fancy font. The most commonly used professional fonts can be Times New Roman, Arial, Calibri, Georgia. There are some more of such font styles, but you have to look at the university guidelines where you are applying to. Sometimes they do mention the required font style. Again, margins, the standard is zero point 0.7 to 1 inch on either side, but you have to again check the university or institute's guidelines before you start making your main biodata. When you write your CV or resume, you have to make sure that it should be in active voice, no pronouns, and perfect tense. Word usage should be strong action words, such as led or organized or performed, instead of using tried or attempted or assisted. Okay. Strong action words, they show confidence in whatever activity you mention. Avoid redundancy. Don't use the same word at multiple locations or same information in two different sections of your CV or resume. And try not to get too technical. Okay. These are the sections of CV and resume. Now you can see there are a lot of common sections as well, but I have highlighted the ones which are of major importance for either CV or resume. And I'll explain how to write all of them one by one. One thing you should note here is that personal information always goes at the top. Other information in these important sections, it doesn't have to follow this exact order, but the important sections should always be in the first half of your biodata. Other sections, the co-curriculars or awards and achievements, they can be later. So, we have now covered the parent CV and the choosing befitting formats part. The next part is understanding job requirements, and based on that, how do you tailor make your CV? Now, as I mentioned, these 2 points are very critical, and many students do not understand these very well, which is where they make mistakes. in making their main CV. So I'm going to spend considerable time on these 2 points. Now, understanding job requirements. You have to remember that every job application, even an internship application, is more or less like matchmaking. Okay. So you have to find commonalities between you, as in your scientific profile, and the lab or the institute which you're applying to. Okay. The same process is also going to be done by the examiner. So if you do this job of identifying the commonalities very well and highlight it in your CV, then it becomes easier for the examiner to go through your CV and understand that you can be a potential candidate. Now, in a scenario where there are open job vacancies, advertisements available on social media, they clearly mention the requirements. They mention the techniques or the education background that is expected. Then it becomes easy for you to sort of find those commonalities with your profile. But in a scenario where you're making a direct application to a professor's lab and there is no job vacancy available, how would you understand what are the job requirements? So, today we are going to do a real time hunt of job requirements in the profile that I'm just going to share with you. Now, imagine yourself as a bachelor's or master's student who is planning to apply for an internship to Professor Sudeshna Nandakumar's lab. Okay. And what you do is to understand what she exactly works on, you would go through her laboratory webpage. Ideally, to find the job requirements, you have to find commonalities between whatever you have learned theoretically, as in your theory classes, in your practicals, or any of your projects, and see if any of that is matching with the laboratory profile. For instance, I start reading Professor Sudeshna's profile. Our lab is interested in understanding the role of membrane proteins in antibiotic resistance. Membrane proteins. I have learned about membrane proteins in protein biology. I have decent theoretical understanding of membrane proteins. Okay, this is one commonality. So I highlight this one. Next, we utilize a combination of chemical drugs and plant-based flavonoids that mimic the structure of classical antibiotics. I have done a drug development course and a little bit of in silico computational drug design. So I have some understanding of that. So I highlighted that bit. Plant-based flavonoids. I had experience of extracting plant pigments from some leaves, which is quite similar to extracting other pigments like flavonoids. This is another commonality. So I would highlight that one. Similarly, I highlighted structure of classical antibiotics. I possibly have experience in understanding them in my microbiology class. So I've highlighted that one. So likewise, I would go through the entire profile and highlight the possible commonalities. Now, what I'm going to do is I'll leave this slide and I'll ask all of you to go through this entire profile. Like I have highlighted some of my commonalities, you can highlight some of the commonalities that a possible bachelor's or master's student can have with this profile. I'll give you 5 minutes and then you tell me what can be a possible commonality. The 5 minutes start now. Vedanti, I would also like you to participate in this, and perhaps you can start telling us one of this commonality.
Ma'am, right now or after 5 minutes?
You can wait for 5 minutes and then we'll start.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah.
Oh, Bhakti ma'am, can you repeat the question? One of the participant has asked in the message.
Okay. So imagine a bachelor's or a master's student is interested in Professor Sudeshna's lab, applying for internship, and he or she is going through this profile. Now, ideally, when you go through a profile, you have to find any commonalities between your theory or practical experience and this professor's lab work. For instance, when I went through this profile, I found membrane proteins as a common factor between my studies and this profile. So I highlighted that one. Likewise, you can highlight other things in this profile. So go through it and highlight as many technique or any specific terms like proteins or structures that you might have learned during your bachelor's or master's. Is anybody ready with the answers?
Yes, ma'am. Shall I start?
Yes, please. Do you want me to keep the presentation on the slide mode? Oh, sorry, slideshow mode?
Ma'am, it's fine this way also.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Vedanti.
So, from the first paragraph, I knew about membrane proteins, and then came chemical drugs. But about the extraction from the plant, I don't know much about the plant-based flavonoids. It's like I know about flavonoids, but now not how it is extracted. Then came the structure of antibiotics and waterborne bacterial infections. From the second paragraph, I know
Um,
that as a through. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Those are actually really good points, but I would like somebody else to find such commonalities from the second paragraph. Any volunteers? Nandini, are you ready with the answer? Did you understand the question?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am,
Yeah.
am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, ma'am. So in the second paragraph, I have read about the antimicrobial and wound healing properties of neem. So
Mm-hmm.
I know something about that. And
Mm-hmm.
the antimicrobial activity at the cell reflected in cell biology and the proteins that are involved.
Your voice is breaking a little bit. Can you repeat the last
Yes,
part where you mentioned cell biology?
yes, ma'am. I said that I have read about the mechanism of cell wall junctions and their types and how they function. So I related with that when I read about it in cell biology.
Great. Anybody found anything relatable in the last paragraph? Yes, Muskan, go ahead.
Ma'am, in the third paragraph, ma'am, about the analysis of dose response, ma'am, we have studied the ADME curve related to that
Mhm.
in our forensics. So, I have a basic knowledge of analyzing dose response that high dosage and repetitive slow dosage could lead to abnormalities and disturb physiological responses. So, I have a knowledge on about that.
Fantastic, fantastic. Anybody else? Amandeep, Damayanti, could you find anything common between your profile and this particular lab profile?
I think I observed that the last paragraph mentions about techniques such as spectroscopy and methods like analyzing dose response, which I have a basic background on. So I would probably highlight that.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so now you've understood in a scenario where it's a direct application, how to find these commonalities. Remember, these commonalities are something that the professor would expect from a potential intern in his or her lab. Okay. Now, once you go through the lab web page and highlight these commonalities, I would urge you to take one extra step, which is after reading the lab web page, go through the recent most two or three publications of the professor's profile. Now, a general concern is at bachelor's or master's stage, you may not understand everything from the publications, but at least go through the abstract, understand like the crux of what they're doing, and then you can head straight to the methodology section. It is here where you would find the exact details of the techniques that are frequently used currently in the lab. For instance, when you went through the lab web page, I bet you couldn't find bacterial streaking and transformation, chromatographic based techniques, or plasmid DNA isolation. These methodology sections are your jackpot. That is where you would find those techniques that you can highlight in your CV, which would make you stand out from rest of the candidates and make more relevant for that lab profile. So I'm going to revise this. Make your parent CV, choose a befitting format. In this scenario, because it's an academic job application, it's going to be a CV and not a resume. Then this is how you do finding the job requirements task. Okay. Now, once you have understood all of this, let's dive straight into making your CV. But before that, does anybody have any questions, any queries? Manjusha, go ahead. Yes, Manjusha, you can put up your question. Hi, Manjusha, can you hear us? You can go ahead with your question or we can type it in the chat box. Okay, I guess Yeah, go ahead, Manjush. I saw that you have raised your hand. You can ask your question now.
Am I audible now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So, ma'am, I recently joined. Can you give an overview of whatever you taught till now?
Ma'am, you're on mute right now.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So there are basically two types of biodata. One is your CV, and another is resume. CV is generally used for academic jobs, meaning applications where you're applying to a university or research institute or a college where the laboratory works on basic science research for making publications. Resume, on the other hand, is used for mostly industrial or applied science institutes. A CV is supposed to be detailed with more focus on your experience, publication, and presentation of your work in conferences. As opposed to this, a resume should be brief with more focus on technical as well as personality skills. You should always and always start making your CV or resume by first making a parent CV or like a parent biodata document where you just list all details of your scientific profile, and you use information from here to make the main functional CV or resume. Always remember, make an independent new version of your biodata for every application. Don't use the same biodata for everything. And the last thing which I discussed was finding your job requirements. So, in a scenario where you're making a direct application for internship, let's say, and there is no job vacancy available, job advertisement available on social media, then you go through the professor's profile and find techniques or any aspects of that profile which have any commonalities with your own scientific profile. For instance, if a professor is, let's say, working on antibiotic resistance, they are looking at antimicrobial compounds. If you have learned any of that, if you have done basic microbiology techniques, then you can highlight those points in that profile. Apart from that, you should also look at 2 to 3 recent publications of that professor, go through the methodology section and make a list of all the techniques that they're using and see if any of those techniques you have learned in your practical classes or any of your projects. Okay. Now, once you understand what is, okay, Abhish has a question. Ma'am, why do we need different series for different programs? Okay, so every job has a different requirement. So you have to tailor make your CV based on those requirements. For instance, I'm applying to, let's say, Sudeshna's lab, but um, I cannot put every single detail of my profile there. I should highlight the techniques that I've learned, which are more common for that particular laboratory profile. If not, then it is high chance that the examiner is not going to read the entire CV. They don't want to know everything that you have done. They want to know the things that are useful for them. That's why you should always and always make a different CV for every application. Even if it is applications for IS fellowship or these JNCSR fellowship, read their requirements and make sure that you include everything that they expect and make a different version of that. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation. Now, we are going to switch to making a CV. And let's go by going through every single section of the CV. Firstly, Personal information. What do you write here? You should write your full name, your contact information, at least email ID, and current residential address, an address where somebody can post anything and you will receive this on time. Nationality, especially if you are doing application for a foreign university. Date of birth, again, mostly for a foreign university. Excuse me. And possibly a professional photo. Now, these days, there are several institutes which specifically mention not to include a professional photo just to avoid any racial bias of examination. So, I would again urge you to go through the guidelines of the prospective institute. Next, let's look at how to write education section. Now, here you should ideally write your degree name and majors, what is the specialization of the degree, the university affiliation or college, grade of the most recent degree or semester. Always write your degrees, all the information in descending chronological order. The recent one at the top, the older ones later, always. And if you want, you can also put relevant coursework, but let's say not more than 3. To give you an example, this candidate has written MSc in biochemistry and duration of when this was done. If you haven't finished graduation, you can always write expected graduation in so and so year, university affiliation, relevant coursework. Remember, Sudeshna's laboratory expected for structural biology, and this person has very rightfully written relevant coursework as structural biology. And the CGPA, the grade for this recent degree. The previous degree was BSc honors, so and so duration, and so was the college affiliation. Okay. Now, another thing here is that you can choose to write the relevant coursework here, or you can make it as a separate section, and I'll explain how to do that in a few minutes. After education, let's look at how to write work experience and courses. Now I'm going to keep the example of this work experience on the side so that like lies in front of your eyes. It's very important because this is the most important section in a CV. Your work experience should include the following details: where and when you did this particular project, what you did in the project, why you did it, and what was the output. For instance, you're writing bachelor's thesis project, okay? When and where it was done. What was it? It was about development of plant-based fragrances. A little bit more about what you did. Developed chromatography methods for pigment isolation from corn. So this part covers what you did and also in a way why you did it. Okay. And very importantly, the output was that the study developed cheaper extraction methods with much lower ethanol requirements. So this is what you have achieved. Okay. Likewise, you should write for every project that you have done. In case it gets a huge list and you want to curtail the length of your CV, you can highlight the experience which has techniques or aspects which are closer to the lab of your interest. Okay. Also, sometimes people just write these details. They mention the aim, which sometimes is fairly explanatory, and just straight away write this last sentence, which is the output. Okay. Now, you can also supplement your work experience with relevant courses. If you do not have a work experience, then also you can just write courses. Now, this can be relevant courses from your curriculum, or it can be some online courses that you've done on Coursera or Udemy or such platforms. But in order to make this appear authentic, mention that this is a certified course from so and so institute and give a link of that course. So, work experience is one of the very critical sections. If you do not have any work experience, I would urge you to start at least some project in your college or university. Next part is your technical skills. Now, in a scenario where you do not have major work experience, you can really, really outshine through your technical skills section. But the common mistake here is that many people just write a huge list of techniques that they've learned. Now, this does not give me, an examiner, the details of what you have really done using these techniques. So, the way to write this is, for instance, if I have to write about plasmid DNA isolation, I should write isolation of so and so DNA using so and so kit. If it is some kind of a PCR, polymerase chain reaction for amplification of so and so gene, which type of PCR, you mention it, and possibly the sample or the model organism you have used. If you've done, let's say, spectroscopy, just another example, don't just write NMR spectroscopy. You should write what you've done using it. Let's say within this, you've done synthesis and identification of carbene compounds. Okay. Even if it is a part of your college practicals, you can always mention that you have learned spectroscopy where you analyzed absorbance of so and so compounds. And in bracket, you can mention learned in college practicals. So the examiner knows that you have some level of practical knowledge of this, but it's not so much in details. Nevertheless, if you join their lab, they don't have to teach you from scratch. They know that you have some basic understanding of how to do it. Next, I'm going to reiterate, don't just write a huge list of techniques learned, give details. Okay. Publications and presentation, again, a specific way of writing it. Write your publications in descending chronological order, latest on the top, oldest later. Use a uniform format. How to do that? Put your publication name in Google Scholar. Below the link, you can find this cite option. It is generally with the inverted apostrophes. Once you click on that, you get multiple formats. You can choose any of the format. Stick to that format for every publication that you're putting in your CV. Highlight your name and add a link to the publication. Example is this. Now, in a scenario where you do not have a paper yet, but you are in a position to have a publication very soon. So, how do you write it? Give a tentative title of the paper, highlight your name, and if you have not really submitted your manuscript and you're still doing experiments or writing the manuscript, you can write manuscript in progress. But you have submitted and not heard from the editor, then you write manuscript in pipeline. Okay. Now, presentations in scientific conferences, again, a specific format. If you have just attended, you can also just add attended so and so conference. That's also fine. If you're given a presentation, make sure you write either it's a poster presentation or a stage, that is platform presentation. Mention the title of your presentation, name of the meeting, the actual name of the meeting, venue and date. Here is the example. Poster presentation, so and so is the title, meeting name, venue and date. Okay. So this brings us to the main section of CV. We covered how to write personal information, education, work experience and courses, technical skills, publications and presentations. Okay. Now I'm going to take another break here and I would ask each one of you to write at least one of your technical skills in detail. Let's say I'll give you 3 minutes for this. Is anybody ready with one technical skill?
Ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am, I'd like to give it a try.
Sure, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. So I have framed my technical skill as analyzed the cell survivability of DU145 prostate cancer cell line through MTT assay.
Good. That sounds nice. Vedanti and Manjusha have also raised hand. Go ahead, Vedanti.
I have written UV spectroscopy, calculating impurities in DNA, RNA, and proteins.
Okay, sure. What kind of spectroscopy was this?
UV.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that. All right. Sure. Amandeep has mentioned others can also type in the chat box. Manjusha, do you want to go next?
Ma'am, I want to give a try. Like, I'm a first year student, so I have,
Sure.
so till now I have done the hemocytometer, how to count blood cells, WBCs and RBCs using hemocytometer. So I know about that.
Yeah, sure. You can write that.
So,
Abhisht?
um,
Did a project on Pythia particle physics event generator. Did an exercise to generate the process between proton and proton collision and plotted the graph between px component of momentum of top quark.
Okay. So you don't have to write plotting the graph. You can just write analyzed so and so.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. Anybody else in the chat box? I'll wait for 1 minute if you wish to type.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Ma'am, do we need to just show our project? Like, as I said that I did a project on, I learned a skill on Pythia. So do I need to just show what have I done, like in some sort of Google Docs document or any way of writing in some PDF or PPT? Do I need to just attach that into my CV?
No, not needed. So you can just mention that you have learned this.
Mm-hmm.
Was it done like using some online course, or was it something that you learned and did it in your college?
Actually, I self-taught myself by the method of by YouTube and some journal of Cornell and MIT.
Okay, so let me understand this correctly. Can you repeat what technique you have learned?
Uh, Actually, it's a Pythia particle physics event generator. Actually, I did an
Mm-hmm.
exercise to generate the process between proton and proton collision. It's a
Mm-hmm.
program you have to type certain numbers and that will generate some energy values and momentums, and plotted the graph between px component of momentum, x component of momentum of a top quark T.
But have you done it yourself, or was it like a virtual exercise?
I done myself.
Okay, so then you can certainly mention in your CV, but you don't have to attach anything.
Actually, it was the project given to me by my like the professor of IUP. She told me to just because she don't have any internship positions. She told me to do this exercise on anytime later and
That's
just
fine.
send that result.
That's fine. That's fine. But you don't have to attach anything. You can just mention what you have done with that project, which is
Okay, ma'am.
fine. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am.
Ma'am, Kritika
There
Kumari.
are, yes. Kritika Kumari has written isolation of genomic DNA from E. coli through agarose gel electrophoresis. Okay, so you have to put two things here: isolation of genomic DNA from E. coli. What technique you've used? You cannot really isolate genomic DNA from agarose jelly electrophoresis. So mention sort of the kit that you have used or a technique that you've used for genomic DNA isolation. You can mention something as simple as SDS based lysis or something like that. And agarose jelly electrophoresis would be next technique, where you can mention that you analyzed the quality or integrity of this DNA. So there would be two different techniques per se. Affinity chromatography, purified topoisomerase from E. coli. Sure, sounds good. Okay, great. I'm happy to see that there is very active participation. All right. So, with the interest of time, I'll just move on to the presentation. We've covered most of it, but there are some parts which are remaining. So, we covered the main sections of CV. So let's look at the main sections of resume. There are quite a bit of common sections which you can write pretty much in the same way. But remember, for resume, you have to make it brief and more crisp. Okay. Now let's focus on these two interesting, unique sections of resume: professional summary and transferable skills. Okay. Now, what is a professional summary? It is nothing but a snapshot of your core competencies and your skill set. It can be both technical as well as personal skills. Now, this is actually something useful for both the candidate as well as the examiner. For the candidate, it makes a fantastic first impression because professional summary lies right below your personal information. For the recruiter, this is like a first filter. They go through your summary. If they like it, then they know they can go through the rest of the resume. So this is something that you can really focus and make like a fantastic first impression. To give you an example, a summary is generally for like 4 or 5 sentences, very snappy sentences. First two sentences are generally educational background and technical expertise. And the next one or two are about your personality skills and your sort of future goal. I see that somebody has raised hand, but I'll take that comment later. Okay, so what is this person written for summary? MSc final year student with a background in organic chemistry. So it gives you an understanding of this person's educational background and where this person stands in terms of his or her degree course. Next, experienced in synthesis and purification of ethers. Gives you a little bit of understanding of technical skills. Next, dedicated and diligent team player with attention to details. This is about his or her personality skills. Lastly, future goal, passionate about contributing to improved development of dyes. Okay, get a gist of it. Educational background, technical expertise, personal skills, future goal. It gives you an image of this person's scientific professional character. If this appears good to the examiner, the resume is definitely going to be reviewed. Next, unique section for resume: transferable skills. This could be the personality skills like leadership skills, teamwork or coordination, management, networking, organization, and so on. Don't make this like a huge list. 3 to 4 relevant skills are good enough. You can give 1 or 2 examples. It can be examples from your extracurricular activities like cultural events or artwork, which is fine. Now, in many cases, especially if you're applying for internships in companies, they mention some of such skills in their job requirements. For instance, we want somebody who can thrive in teams. We would like a candidate who is good at connecting with different people, and putting information together. So you have to keep an eye for these things because personality really matters for non-academic jobs. Uh, I'm going to do another exercise after this for transferable skills, but in the interest of time, I'll move on a little bit. Summary, CV, orange part shows main section. We've covered everything. Resume, main section. Professional summary, right after personal information, and special importance for technical and transferable skills. Okay. Now, uh, we can quickly look at the co-curricular and other optional sections. Co-curricular section, you can keep it brief. Don't make this like a huge list of your hobbies. And you can preferably give simple examples. For instance, teaching experience, if you've done any tuitions or short teaching experiences for science awareness and so on, you can put your art and community service experiences also. In a scenario where you've done any kind of volunteering work, and if it is just one or two such activities, you can put it here. If it's a huge list, you can make volunteering work as a title and put that separate section apart from co-curriculars perhaps, or a subsection within co-curriculars. If any of your volunteering work has given you any transferable skill, any personality skill which is relevant for the job, mention only that specific skill part in your transferable skills. Okay, but that is only in a scenario of resume. Co-curriculars, next is awards and achievements. Keep your achievements part more closer to the scientific side with minimal mention of awards from your extracurricular activities. If there's something really top notch, then one or two of them, but not many. Lastly, language proficiency. This is optional and mainly for people who are applying for foreign institutes. But here you have to mention, don't just write the languages that you know, also write the proficiency. For instance, I've given English professional, Hindi conversational, French beginner. Now, these are official terms, not something that I've made up. You can actually go to Google and try to understand what these words mean. Okay, for instance, if you write, let's say, professional, that means that your language proficiency is good enough to read, write, understand, and talk to other native English speakers. You can also write, understand documents written in this language, official documents written in this language. Okay, with that, we come to the end of what are the different sections, what can be the sequence, and how you should write them. Remember, you have to highlight the relevant aspects in every section, put them at first. You can also make them possibly bold or underline. Don't highlight everything. Highlighting everything is highlighting nothing. Remember. Okay, so I have some concluding remarks. First of all, once you start making your main functional CV or resume, you have to make sure this process involves clarity on job requirements and your skills. Remember commonalities and matchmaking. Next, maintain a uniform format. You have to go through the layout, font style, and all these details on the institute's web page. Many people write guidelines for these. Your language of writing should be assertive, not arrogant, assertive. No passive words, but use strong action words like organized, or performed, or led. Always give relevant information first. Once you're done with writing all of this information, make sure you proofread. Get it cross checked from somebody else. Also, you can use the free version of Grammarly, something which Rachna had also mentioned yesterday. It will correct many of your sentence structures, grammatical errors, spelling mistakes, and so on. Lastly, very important, never write your CV or resume in haste. Make sure you spend enough brainstorming time for making a parent version of your biodata and understanding all these points and putting them together and going through it very carefully. Remember, when you really, really nail all of these points, your CV will stand out and you will be called for the job application. With that, thank you for your attention. You can find good CV templates on these. For such webinars or any involvement activities, you can follow us on our involvement website or the social media handle. Thank you. I open the floor now for question answer session, but we are not done with just question answers. There is going to be another fun activity where I am going to give you a sample CV and resume, and you have to be the examiner for those biodata. So 10 minutes of question answer session and then the fun activity of reviewing CV and resume. You can start putting your questions in the chat box or just raise hand. Nandini, go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am, for your session. It was really interesting. Ma'am, regarding the technical skill part, I had a question like while I was doing my summer research internship, I came across multiple techniques which I personally did not perform, but I experienced it by watching them as the uh, like the machines and everything, they were used by the PhD scholars only, and I wasn't allowed to conduct my own independent experiments on them, but they made me go through the entire step by step process. So should I also mention those in my technical skills? Can I mean do that?
If this particular skill is something extremely relevant for the next job that you're looking for, let's say you came across a professor's profile and they're doing this technique quite frequently, you can mention that you have observed, let's say, sample preparation or the entire running of the experiment and data analysis. But use the word such as observed or performed virtually. That shows that you have a decent understanding, but not enough to take up that experiment on your own. So the idea here is to make the examiner understand what is sort of the level of expertise you have with that technique. So I would suggest do mention, but it should be clear that you have observed and not done it yourself.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. And ma'am, one more thing regarding the publication section, that there are some articles or scientific articles that we give for publications in magazines and like our college magazines or even private ones like India Bioscience and some things like that. So, ma'am, how should we mention them in the publication? Like the citations are not exactly available on Google Scholar for them.
Okay. So first of all, they are not, they don't come under publication section. I understand the publication word is very loosely used, but publication in academic CV, it strictly means publication of research work in a scientific journal where your research work is going to be reviewed by certain experts. But if you have done such activity as you mentioned, put it as either science communication heading and then mention what you have done here. Ideally, put a link of your article so that the examiner understands what article that you're talking about.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. So, ma'am, these publications also include chapters,
Yeah, you can
book
mention, yeah,
chapters.
is it book chapters?
Yes, ma'am, book chapters.
Yeah, you can mention that, but then make it a separate if it's multiple, make it a separate section because
Okay, ma'am.
book chapters are more academic, not for general public like India Bioscience journals
Yes,
for that
ma'am.
matter. Yeah, you
Thank you,
can
ma'am.
mention that separately. You're welcome. Any other questions? You can also give me feedback. Okay, Abhisht, go ahead.
Ma'am, I have a question, ma'am, that you mentioned. Earlier in the slide, you mentioned that you must have to add work experience in the form of project. What if this candidate doesn't have work experience in the form of project, but have work experience in some sort of companies or like I said, content writer or article writer, like sort of things. So, how do we mention that in our CV?
Okay, so you can, if you've written something like an article, or let's say you have worked for a science outreach work, in that scenario, you either put it as either volunteering work. So, for instance, I used to teach some science experiments to local school students. Then I made a separate section as science outreach, or it came under volunteering work.
Mhm.
In another scenario where you've written an article, then it becomes of slightly more importance because scientific writing is a very valued skill for both CV and resume, actually. There, you put it under science communication part. Did
But
I
ma'am,
answer
I
the
have,
question?
but ma'am, I have done internship in the company known as Leaf Paper, which is actually a e-journal, electronic newspaper, and that's an internship. So can we write that on that in the workspace section, or do we write in the science experience, other like sort of things?
Ah, I see. Now I understand your question. Yeah, but I think in your scenario, you should write it in work experience section because it was, yeah, it was an internship, official internship in a place. Yeah, you can write it in work experience. There again, maintain the same format that what was the aim of the project. It can be something as simple as, curating uh, scientific journals or scientific articles of specific type. What you did there as analysis, editing, graphical representation, all of these things, and yeah, give details of duration of the of the internship. You may not be able to write the output there, but fairly give understanding of what you have actually done, which is good enough.
And ma'am, one more question. When I asked you in the publication session, you told us that if you are writing the publication, you must write it as in process, and if you submitted it, write pipeline as a
Mm-hmm.
bracket. Ma'am, actually, I wrote a paper and submitted it, but I haven't heard from them because of their college issues and some other problems. So, do I need to add the link to of my article, like the rough sketch of my article to the CV?
Uh, you can, but then you will have to give like, I don't know, Google Drive link or something like that. So you can add it, but it still remains as manuscript in pipeline.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, does it hamper your chances because, like, there
No,
may be some errors?
no, that is fine. I mean, errors would be mostly in terms of either doing, I won't call them errors. They would be mostly like you have to do another experiment to prove a point. So long as it's a well written, grammatically correct article, I don't think anybody would question it. Rather, it's quite impressive that you have participated either in working or writing an article at bachelor's or master's stage, even if it is in pipeline or in progress. That is fine.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome. Any other questions? You can also write your feedback for the session. Vedanti, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. As you said that we should filter our CV as per the internship requirement, but often the UG students of first and second year have very less hands-on skills. So, if we are applying for, say, genome editing, and our skills include hemocytometer, UV spectroscopy, centrifuging, AP culture, etc., so which are like very basic and are not related to the internship. So, in that case, should we mention them in our skills or should we not? For example, AP culture is like very different from genome editing, which we are applying for. So, what should we do in that case?
Very good question. So I think in this scenario, you have to rely more on how you write your statement of purpose and or the email that you write. So here, your candidature heavily depends on your interest rather than your theoretical and practical understanding. In this scenario, I would suggest mention all the skills that you've learned in your lab space. It can be through practical courses. Um, you can also give names of the courses that you've learned either in high school or your first and second year college curriculum, which could be relevant for genome editing. So, for instance, in genome editing, the you need to have an understanding of chromosomes, DNA structure, protein DNA interaction, perhaps bacterial or animal tissue culture, and I think perhaps also just understanding like DNA protein sequences. So long as you have done some kind of these courses in your CV, you can highlight them. But I think that is all you can do as a fresher. There, you have to make sure that you go through the company or the laboratory profile very well and show that a specific aspect in that institute really, really fascinates you, and that is why you're applying for that internship. It all here depends on your eagerness to learn rather than your scientific profile because you're yet to make a really good profile.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome. Okay. If there are any more questions, you can always write in the chat box. I'm going to share link of two sample biodata. One is CV and one is resume, and we will. I'll give you around 5 minutes to go through them. You have to come up with at least one good and one bad thing about both the biodata. Okay. So just give me 1 second. I'll share the links in the chat box. There you go. Is the second link working?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. For those who can see the link, start finding one good and one bad point about that CV or resume. I'll give you 5 minutes. Manjula, I'm not sure if you can see this, but just check. It's strange that some people can and some people cannot see it. Manjula, can you see it? Can you read it?
Yes, ma'am, I can read it.
Okay, I'll scroll down in like a couple of seconds. Okay, I'm scrolling down again.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm moving to the sample CV part. Just sharing it here. I'm scrolling down. Okay. Pon Shankaran has asked a question. Ma'am, in our CV, can we create sections like certifications to mention about our internship, BC course, Coursera, and NPTEL courses and typewriting? Pawan Shankaran, yes, you can create multiple sections. Certification can be a separate section, but internship certification does should not be just a part of certification. You should have it as a separate explanation in work experience. Frankly speaking, these days nobody asks for certificates from your internships. But if you really want, you can put it. Okay, I hope everybody has seen the sample CV and resume. You're welcome, Ponchankuran. Can we please have one volunteer stating one good and one bad point about, let's say, the sample CV first? the academic CV. Vedanti and Damayanti, would you like to start?
Yes,
Ma'am,
sure. Let me try.
Okay, Damayanti, do you want to start?
Yeah, so for me, from the CV, what I felt was that the categorization was really nice, like different sections for different skills or experiences. But I also felt that it was a bit long and like there were a lot of details about marks and things which may not be that relevant for an examiner unless everything else is really good. So maybe we can cut down on those details.
Yeah, great. Vedanti?
Ma'am, the good part, as Damayanti mentioned, was the structuring of the CV, and the bad part includes that they haven't said that what they did in summer training. Like they just mentioned medical biotechnology, but what in medical biotechnology? And
Exactly.
second is what they mentioned that they have done PCR, but again at the same time PCR of what? Whether it was an organism or
Yeah,
or an animal or what? Like,
exactly.
and ma'am, they didn't mention
Brilliant.
the relevant courses in the CV, so these were the points.
Yeah, sounds great. Good job, Vedanti and Damayanti. Anybody else? Nandini, would you like to give a try? And then let's say Manjusha.
One more thing I found in the CV that was a bit wrong was that there was the education qualifications weren't written in descending order.
We
Which
can't
is,
hear you, Nandini. Do you wish to type in the chat box?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, Sachin, go ahead.
Ma'am, I see in the CV case, like in some cases, there are fine problems, such as in the section of awards and achievement, there is no space, and uh, like in the case of extracurricular activities, there is also font change. I think these are the like mistakes in the CV.
Yeah, good points, Sachin. Good points. I agree with you. Anybody else? Okay, Nandini has written in the chat box. I found that the educational qualifications weren't in descending order. Very well observed. Amandeep, bad part, formatting, spacing error was huge in both documents. Good part, different categories are involved. Okay, so I'll just summarize these comments, adding my own comments to it. I agree, both the sample CV and resume had formatting errors, non uniformity of formats, especially font style. Another thing, if you would have observed, the CV had redundancy in terms of education. So initially, the person mentions name and everything, and then mentions recent degree. After giving all the scores of every semester, which is clearly unnecessary, the person also mentions about 12th standard and 10th standard when they finished it, and all these details which are not very necessary. Again, details of work experience not mentioned, which they should have. In resume, details of techniques not mentioned. There was just a list of techniques, which is not right. The extracurricular section was good, but was very lengthy, not very necessary, and relevant courses were not mentioned. Another error in CV was that the email ID was a personal sort of fancy email ID, which, as Rachna mentioned yesterday, you should not put in your CV or any job application process. Lastly, there were two addresses mentioned in the CV. One was the college address, one was the personal address. Now, if the examiner has to send anything through postal services, the person doesn't know whether to send it to the college address or to the personal address. So, that is again another information not taken care of. Okay. All in all, you got a good understanding of how to write an effective CV. I'm glad to see that everybody was very attentive for every point, which shows in the details of your comments. I really thank you all for your patient listening. It's been almost 2 hours. And it was really a pleasure giving this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Thank you, ma'am. It was a very wonderful and informative session. I'm sure all of us have to go back and rewrite our CVs.
Thank you, Panchankaran. We have gained a lot through this session, is what he has written. Thanks a lot. You're welcome. I'm glad to see this was useful.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Ma'am, I guess Nandini had a question before we started with this CV and resume thing.
Okay.
Nandini, do you want to ask your question now?
Yeah, you've mentioned that she can type the question. Yeah, Nandini, go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Ma'am, I just wanted to clarify that yes, I asked the questions before, so it's all clear from my side. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay, we can conclude this session and perhaps also stop recording. This session would be available on Involvement's social media handle, I think including YouTube as well. So you can watch the session again. Vedanti, we can close the call maybe.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Bhakti, for this session. It was really informative for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm glad it was useful. Thank you, Kritika. Thank you, Abhisht. Thank you for your comments. I'm glad to see that this can be this was a very interactive session and useful for all of you. Okay, I'm going to leave the call now. Perhaps we can also stop recording if you wish to.
Sure.